than that. Good morning. The press is covering you from all over the world. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. There we go. All right. Okay, so every year, our food system creates the problems that we've been working and talking about how we solve over the last day and a half, the negative health consequences, the planetary consequences, as well as, of course, the social impacts. Poor diets are now globally recognized as the #1 driver of diet-related disease, and in many countries, the #1 driver of death. And we know what the solutions are. We've listened to them for the last 2 days. But we also recognize that without adequate capital, we can't get there. We won't get there. And so the question, as the solutions, as we say, are clear, and so we ask that central question: who pays the $1 trillion, the billions of dollars, for the $1 trillion outcome that we know we can achieve with the right investment? And who brings together in this geopolitical world of challenges today the government, the private sector capital, the institutional, as well as the family offices that are necessary, as well as the philanthropic capital that's required. And so this morning, I'm joined here by leaders who together represent all of those communities, the finance, policy, and philanthropic perspectives of who pays, to answer that question of who pays. Amit Bouri is the CEO of the Global Impacting Investing Network, mobilizing private capital toward investments that deliver both profits and purpose. Maximo goes without introduction. Is a chief economist at the FAO and provides the evidence base that governments and multilateral institutions rely on to weigh the real costs and benefits of food systems change. And Anna Lappé, the executive director of the Global Alliance of the Future of Food. Anna leads a philanthropic coalition driving bold action and resources for a just and sustainable transformation of the food system. So let's get started. The title of our section: Who Pays the Trillions? From where you sit, finance, policy, philanthropy, quickly, who must step up first? Amit.
I actually believe it's D, all of the above. I think systemic problems require systemic responses, and there's so much urgency. We need leadership from everyone all at once.
So
Maximo.
I was going to say you, and me, but he beat me. So I think if we have to prioritize right now, most of the resources will come from the international financial organizations and private sector. So I think those two sectors will need to really put their act together and try to support governments, especially the most vulnerable one, to achieve this goal.
Well, you've heard it. It's over to you, Anna.
Well, so we didn't coordinate our answers, but I would have said, same. It's everyone, everywhere, all at once. But when I think about this question about kind of who pays first, I think about it also from the frame of what do we first need to do even before we think about the who pays, and it's to imagine the possibilities. I mean, I don't know how many of you were kept awake last night with spirals of Johan Rockström's planetary boundaries overshoot, or the kind of haunting of the hockey sticks we all saw yesterday. But I kept thinking about this phrase from the American author Rebecca Solnit, who said, "We live inside imagined worlds, and the task is to imagine better ones." And so I think part of how we're going to trigger this kind of $1 trillion answer is to imagine that we can even do it, that the trajectory we saw and we're seeing in the Eat Lancet is not destiny, that we can change those hockey sticks. We're going to do it with unlocking trillions in finance. And so I think it's the all of us, everywhere, all at once.
Terrific. All of us, everywhere, all at once. Okay, so Amit, all of us everywhere. Impact investing has often been described as a spark that proves what is possible. Yet we know the capital has not flowed to the food and agriculture asset class as it has to others. And so food systems transformation requires not millions, but billions of dollars. How do we move from niche programs, mission-driven capital, to shifting the investors' behavior for mainstream institutional investors? And what signals will get us there fastest?
Great, thank you. Just very briefly, just to make sure everyone knows what impact investing is, I know this is such a multidisciplinary group. Impact investors are investors who are putting capital to work in projects and companies that are designed to deliver both a financial return and a positive impact. It can be social impact, environmental impact, or both. Now, I represent a nonprofit that supports a network of impact investors all over the world, 450 organizations in 60 countries, including here in Sweden, but across 6 continents. It includes large institutional investors, private foundations, family offices, big, huge global institutions, and small boutiques. But the thing that is distinctive about them relative to the rest of the financial world is that they are investing capital to solve problems in the world, including the need to transition our food systems. We've seen a lot of interest in food and agriculture from the impact investing community. Based on our data, we see growth in investment in food and ag at over 28% over the last 5 years. And over half of impact investors say they have at least one investment in the food and agricultural sector. However, to your point, it's not nearly enough for the types of change we need. And if you think about those presentations yesterday about the pressure on our planetary boundaries, we need to change systems, not just do great deals or build great portfolios. So what we focus on is making sure that we move capital at scale with integrity. How do we actually close that $1 trillion financing gap? How do we make sure that we're putting capital to work across the entire food and ag value chain, from inputs to production all the way to distribution and consumption? And we do have members who are active across the entire spectrum. However, we need to move more capital, and we also need to make sure that capital is not just racking up lots of kroners or euros or dollars or rupees, but it's actually landing in real results for people on the planet. So we do a lot of work also in impact measurement and management. We have a system called IRIS Plus that is used by over tens of thousands of investors around the world. It's recently endorsed through the Financing for Development effort of the United Nations as a way of making sure we are tracking impact not just around dollars and cents and returns, but around driving positive outcomes. So I think we're at a moment of transition where we have lots of innovation all over the world, lots of great models demonstrated by all the wonderful attendees here. And it's a moment to bridge all that innovation to scale. And I think impact investing can play part of that role as in collaboration with all the other communities represented here on the stage. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamid. Maximo, thank you. That does deserve a round of applause. Thank you. The numbers that Hamid's just talked about, the outcomes that he's just identified as possible, we know that investing in healthy, sustainable diets do pay off. But those payoffs come in the longer term. But the costs are immediate. In this geopolitical environment that we're in today, you have a tough task. How do you make the economic case compelling? How do you tell the story that's compelling for finance ministers as well as investors to move the capital that is required now?
Let me describe the situation to how this room looks. If you look to that side, there is some light there, no? Where we want to go. You look in front, you have us, so you know the actors, and you are flashing the light on the actors. But then there is the middle, which is darker. That means that we don't know exactly where to move and how to move because we don't have enough evidence. And this has been improving over time. So as you were saying, what we know today is that $12 trillion are the hidden cost of agri-food systems. These are health costs, environment, and social. And health costs are around 70%, so 7% of global GDP. We also know that if we use those resources in the best possible way, we can create around $5 trillion of benefits every year. But the story is more complex than that. There is heterogeneity among the different parts of the world. And also, there are concepts that we don't necessarily everybody understands at the same way. One of those concepts is exactly what you mentioned, which is intertemporality. What I do today will have a cost or a benefit today, but it could also have a cost or a benefit tomorrow. And that intertemporality depends on the level of risk and the level of risk aversion and discount rates that countries and actors will have to play. So what we are facing today in the current world is that we have big countries that have high discount rates, therefore they are doing actions that will benefit them today. We have countries that have low discount rates, they're doing actions that also benefit them tomorrow. Our job is to try to reorient and bring evidence to show why it's so important to take into account this intertemporality and to bring those returns to today so that they understand what it will imply to the society and to their economies. The second concept that also creates complexity is the fact that there are what we call private goods and what we call global public goods. An environment is a global public good, or a global given if it is not resolved. Therefore, we need to find and make actions that cooperate all of us together to create that return. And that means cooperations, that means coherence, that means proper incentives to be able to achieve that. So it's not only enough to understand the benefits in the present value of today, but it's also important to understand how we can put the incentives together to create that cooperation. Because if we don't coordinate and we don't cooperate, we won't be able to achieve the goal that we want to achieve. And that's exactly what we need to pursue. One good example, I believe, is the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty that the G20 of Brazil launched. Because they have the best practices, which is the basket. Then they have the financing pillar, which is to coordinate financing to use those best practices around the world to resolve the problem of the most vulnerable people. And then they have, of course, the pillar of action at the country level. So that type of instruments, if we take them seriously, will help us to achieve that coordination that is needed today. But the business case is clear. The issue is how we change all those actors so that the light starts to improve and policymakers can make the decisions and the private sector can make the decisions, and also, of course, the international financial organizations.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you, Maximo, for making the statement that the business case is clear. Because too often we complicate it, and as a result, we have a challenge telling the story that is necessary to move those leaders as required, as you've just described. So, over to you. Philanthropy has often stepped in when the capital stacks from government, from private sector has not fulfilled what is necessary for the investments that are required to move us forward. From your vantage point, where has philanthropic capital successfully changed the rules of the game, helping unlock these larger volumes of capital that are necessary to really begin to move us beyond those step changes to the system change that's required?
Yeah, I love this question. And from our vantage point, so the alliance that I run has more than 24 philanthropic foundation members, and then we work with philanthropic partners all around the world. And all of us, all of our members, and all of our partners really share this vision for systems change. And yet we recognize, as you've heard from my colleagues here on the stage, that the kind of finance we need, the amount of funding that we need, philanthropic capital will always just be a tiny piece of that story of what we need. So we think a lot about what is the unique opportunity that philanthropy provides. So at its best, highest service, philanthropy should be, as the name itself, philanthropy, love of humans, should be about really trying to bring about the kind of just, healthy, sustainable food that the Eat Lancet 2.0 report is all about. So what are some ways that we've seen philanthropy can play that vital role? One that we've seen is the power of philanthropy stepping in to sort of proof of concept, to show that investments work. So you heard earlier today on that fabulous panel, Vijay from India talk about the work that his farmers movement is doing there to bring about community-based natural farming. So what can philanthropy do? It can help tell the story of when you help farmers get off of dependency on fossil fuel-based inputs, what do you see? You see farmer health go up, shoot up. You see farmer incomes shoot up. You see biodiversity shoot up. At the same time, you see yields increase. So philanthropy can help do that kind of documentation and that evidence and the storytelling that can then inspire public sector to step in and other supports. The second thing that we've seen philanthropy do so powerfully is invest in the advocates in the civil society, in the movements that are going to create the political will and the political opening to have the public sector step up in the ways we know the public sector needs to. We've seen that time and again. You saw earlier on the panel that Roy Steiner hosted on procurement policy and the power of procurement. So philanthropy has been really active in supporting the civil society efforts to push for procurement. The third thing that we've seen philanthropy do that can be so helpful is play that kind of convening and bridge building role. So many of our members are part of something we call RAFT, which stands for Regenerative Agroecological Food System Transitions, a bit of a mouthful, but we call it RAFT. And the idea is that the kind of transitions we're talking about are so context-specific and place-based. The kinds of investable opportunities in the American Midwest is going to be very different than what Vijay needs in Andhra Pradesh. It's going to be very different than what Marina and others need in Brazil. So how can philanthropy play a role in bringing together private partners, public sector, and philanthropy together to look at what kind of investable opportunities there are and what is well suited for philanthropy, what's well suited for impact investing, what's well suited for the public sector. So those are three of the many ways that we see philanthropy really playing this vital role. And again, our theme song maybe of the panel, which is all of us everywhere all at once, philanthropy is a piece of that too.
The diversity of solutions that we always talk about is what is required. Okay, let's do a couple quick rounds of questions. First of all, Amit, to all of you, but first to you, Amit, if you could recommend one bold policy change that this audience could take away that would unlock private and institutional investment into sustainable diets, what would it be?
I think it would be incentives towards the future that we want.
Incentives towards the future that we want. Policy change that incents as opposed to subsidizing the actions that hold us back. Maximo.
I will say what we need is eliminate the coordination failure that we have in the world right now. And that will require to put proper incentive, especially for international financial organizations and for private sector to be able to do properly things. In the case of the financial organizations, I think budget to the financial organizations should be allocated based on their capacity to coordinate and impacts, but not only to potential returns to the actions they do, because I could be picking the best options to get the highest return, but not necessarily coordinating to resolve the serious problems. So I think if we can create a mechanism of coordination through a mechanism of budget by incentives, like we ask countries to do, that could create a significant incentive for these financial organizations to coordinate and to avoid atomization of the resources.
So incentives and coordination of those incentives by governments. Over to you, Anna.
Yeah, I will pick one, although this does kind of feel like picking my favorite child because there's so many great tools out there. But to pick one and echo messages from earlier today, procurement, procurement, procurement. We spend so much money every year on food around the world. It's a really powerful lever for this kind of systems change we need.
And we often talk about farmers grow what the market will buy. And the biggest markets in most companies is public procurement.
Exactly.
So the opportunity to use public procurement is one that we, as a collective global community, should seize and act upon.
100%.
Great point. The last question, and I'll give you 2 sentences this time, okay? What is the single most important step financial leaders must take now to ensure that delivering healthy, just diets within planetary boundaries becomes a reality by 2030 and not just a pipe dream that we're all talking about?
I think it's to invest with an eye towards shifting systems. So not looking at point solutions or point projects, but thinking about the interrelationship between the value chain and kind of how people consume. And if you give me time, I'll expand. But I do think it is really critical that we think about how we're changing entire systems that have huge social benefits, whether it's to the laborers or it's to the consumers, as well as important benefits from an environmental standpoint.
Maximo?
Yeah, look, the transition to consumption of healthy diets, not to access to healthy diets, because there are 2 different concepts. Many people here can consume a healthy diet, but they don't necessarily do it. A lot of people in the world don't have access to it, 2.6 billion people. The trajectory won't be done by 2030, sorry. It will go on down by 2050, possibly, if we do what we need to do. Now, what are the changes that we need? And I cannot say one policy, but let me target the policies by sector, and all of them are related to efficiency. In the case of governments, of course, we have significant amount of money to repurpose, which is for $470 billion, which right now, of the $540 billion on support to agriculture, are distortive. That we can repurpose, so putting incentive to repurpose and work with governments to do that. But then on the financial side, with the private sector, I think we have two key words there. One is de-risking and blending, but not only financial de-risking, and that's the problem that we have. We don't know yet what is the minimum de-risking we need. We basically de-risk. But the other element which will help to get to the minimum de-risking is information de-risking, providing private sector information of where there are opportunities in these countries which are complex, so that they can accelerate the process with this target of improving access to healthy diets and consumption of healthy diets, and at the same time assuring sustainability, so without violating the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I think if we combine both through proper incentive, will allow us to achieve what we're looking for.
Combining both, and the risking issue is so important because so often capital does not flow into the food and agriculture space because you have investors who will suggest that there's too much risk. And so addressing that challenge, not only as you note in the investments themselves, but in the narrative as we deliver it. Anna.
So I'm thinking about this question, Ertharin, through the lens of everything we've been talking about here, and then convening I was at 2.5 weeks ago in Sri Lanka, whose theme song was very similar, Systems Transformation, Now or Never, and it was a convening of more than 700 people for the Nyaleni Global Forum. I don't know if anybody else was there or has heard about it, but it was bringing together 700 people from 102 countries, in 18 simultaneous language translations, representing millions of people that are part of social movements around the world, of indigenous people and pastoralists and small-scale farmers and fishers and urban communities, all working toward food systems change. And so when I think about this question of what do we want investors to do, I think about it, again, in light of the messages from the Lancet 2.0 report and that convening, which is to put justice at the center and to put people at the center, to put the farmers and the food producers and the food workers at the center of your investment strategies, to make sure that if our investments aren't actually helping people, if they're not helping indigenous communities and farming communities and fishing communities, then they're not actually in service of the systems change we need and want. So that would be my call to arms for investors, is really putting people at the center.
And I appreciate the call out to investors to put people at the center. But as we sit in a room like this, we have the leaders who are going to move those investors. And for our final question, what do the people in this room need to do in order to achieve the outcomes with those investors that each of you've described that will help us unlock the capital that is required to move us forward? Amit.
Well, I'll go back to where I started.
And you have 2 sentences.
Okay. To where I started, which is, systemic problems require systemic solutions. And what I think is so powerful about this convening is that we have people from all over the system. We have scientists, we have policymakers, we have investors, entrepreneurs, farmers, and I think what's so important is that we do all think about the role that we play. You investors are one part of the puzzle. They're an important part because they can provide capital, but they do respond to what systems want. They respond to demand signals from buyers, whether it's consumers, institutions, and also what governments and regulators kind of expect of the markets. So I think everyone here has a role to play, and I think thinking about how we work in concert is the real key.
Maximo, what role would you like everyone in this room
look,
to play?
as he said, I think everyone has a role to play here. Our role as a technical institution, normative institution, is to bring evidence to increase the light in the room, so that the differences across the world are more clear and people can make decisions. And aggregate at the global level, because that's what we need for the change in environment and climate. But this goes from institutions like us on technical information to private sector. They know now we have trajectories. There is a lot of work being done by many agencies to try to build those trajectories and what needs to be done. We are working on the roadmap to SDG 2 and 1.5. We need private sector to start adopt those trajectories and to try to understand how they can contribute and come together to be able to achieve that. They need to play a crucial role. They are the biggest producers of food in the world. They are the ones that are could change behavior, could change what is produced and what is consumed. But we also need the academia and the science, because science and innovation will play a crucial role today. And we normally take them in silos. So we need to break those silos, and we need to bring science and innovation to help the process and to question the standard things that we do. We have to question and bring new evidence to be able to achieve that. And of course, civil society will play a crucial role. Civil society has to put pressure to be able to enforce this to happen and this to change. And it goes from food loss and waste. Losses, producers, corporations, but waste, biggest amount of waste in the world is on the consumer side, in the household. It's not in the retail stores, it's not in the restaurants, it's in the households. So if we don't change ourselves on how we consume and buy, we won't be able to achieve the goal, and we have to start from what we can do as quickly as possible.
So Anna, you get the final word. How can people in this room help us move the money that is required?
So we heard from Aoife yesterday that science is not enough, we need finance. And I would add to that, science is not enough, we need finance, and we need imagination. And I think that's what all of us in this room need to embrace, is that sense of the imaginative possibility. Wherever you sit, you are all leaders doing incredible work. Wherever you sit, to really imagine that this is possible, this kind of transition that we need, that we can do it together each in our own way. And so that's what I would end us with, that imaginative possibility.
Imagination. So the diversity of financial solutions that are required to engaged and driven by the imagination of those in this room who will help us move from the arguments of de-risking and what is not possible to a vision of the possible. Thank you all.
Thank you.